Okay, welcome back to the workshops. Today we're going to talk about writing and the different ways in which you use writing for your research and your thesis. The title is Getting Words on the Page Now and for Different Reasons. It can be tempting not to write until you've finished reading or gathered your data or done your note-taking. It's easy to think, it's okay, I've got that sorted in my head, I don't need to write it down. But this is not only asking too much of the RAM space in your brain, it can slow your progress. My first thesis supervisor, who was both very wise and very clever, passed on this quote from a famous English author. And this has stayed with me whenever I do research. The quote is, "How do I know what I think until I see what I write?" I learned that writing was not only expressing oneself on paper, it was also, to use a fancy word, a heuristic. The definition of a heuristic is enabling someone to discover or learn something for themselves. It's not only about setting words down on paper to persuade an external audience, our supervisors, our peers, journal readers, etc. It's also for ourselves as the audience, to help us think our complex thoughts all the way through to their simpler form. It's a way of forcing the jumble of research ideas that accumulate and wash around in our heads into words on a page. And through some almost magical process that I'm sure neuroscientists could explain, it helps us make better sense and meaning of those words than we can when they're refusing to sit still and form a neat, orderly pattern in our minds. The magic continues when we find that by getting them out and down, these thoughts naturally give way to the next level of ideas we may not even have suspected that we had. So we need to think of writing as not the last part of the process, though it's that too, but as an essential tool, an aid to our thinking. In the past, I've mistakenly thought that I needed to work through all of my confusion before putting pen to paper or finger to keyboard and writing well-formed sentences. But that was a real underestimation of the power and purpose of writing. And there's no rule that says that you writing for yourself to help sort your thinking needs to be done in elegant sentences or even in sentences. If you're struggling with a complex idea, write down the odd word, the next word and the next. Do a mind map. Speak it out loud in the language in which you think best. At this stage, the meaning doesn't need to be intelligible to anyone but you. Just the simple act of getting the words out of your head will begin the unravelling process of that complex idea. Elegance can wait. It's the ideas that count at the moment. So, writing for your thesis can be for different purposes. It can be as a heuristic, an activity just for yourself that helps you articulate your thoughts in whatever form that takes. Random words, a mind map, thought bubbles, any utterance that will eventually take you to where your mind wants to lead you. Whatever the method, it needs to work for you. That sense of self-awareness again, as a way of getting things out of your head and onto a page. If you watch police detective shows, like I do, you may have seen the detectives sticking up photos on a board and adding words as they uncover or try to piece together evidence. They keep the board in a very visible location and go back to it with new images or words, or just to stare at it and see if the visual or word cues prompt the next joined up thought, a connection that hadn't been obvious before. You may even want to do something like this with your data, your literature or your methodology research, to see if it helps you see connections that were unclear when you tried to hold all of this stuff in your head. So writing can also be therapy. Like writing as a heuristic, Writing for your well-being may not appear in the drafts of your thesis, but keeping a research journal can have two benefits. Firstly, it can serve the purpose of self-help, writing at the end of each day, perhaps about how your work has gone that day, can be a useful way of getting it out or letting it go. Not intellectual ideas this time, but thoughts and feelings about the joys and despair of the research roller coaster. You might like to tell your journal that you had a wonderful day where you found an amazing and unexpected piece of evidence that has given you an insight into answering your research question that you hadn't previously thought of. Or you may like to tell your journal that you had a very slow day. Your brain seemed to be on strike today, easily distracted, you couldn't focus on your work. Again, writing these things down can discharge the ups and downs of research. Apart from its obvious intellectual challenge, a research project is emotionally and mentally taxing in ways that normal work is not. You may even like to give yourself some advice after noting your day's thoughts or feelings. It may be to say in a couple of words how you could follow up this unexpected insight, or to remind yourself that it's normal to have bad research and writing days or weeks, as well as good ones. And to be patient with yourself and allow the bad days or weeks along with the good to pass. Writing a daily journal also gives you another opportunity to practice writing. Good writing develops from reading and writing as often as you can, even for a few minutes a day. Writing as practice. Sometimes when we read a beautifully written book or journal article or even a birthday card, it's easy to imagine that the writer is simply very talented, born with a skill much greater than ours to craft elegant prose at the drop of a hat. But what we never see is the often mentally and emotionally tortuous process that comes before the elegant language is produced. Writers are artists. They develop and hone their skills by sheer, hard, repetitive work. As is true with any skill, cooking, painting, car maintenance, you get better the more you practice. With writing, you also get better the more you read good writing. When you are writing a thesis, that reading should also include other successful theses. Good models in your discipline are one of the best tools you can use. In addition to scholarly literature, you can also use your spare time, and you should ensure that you have some spare time, to read English language short stories, novels, magazines, or newspapers as part of each day. Whether you're conscious of it or not, some of the language will be embedding itself in your brain and helping you to become a fluent thinker and so writer in English. Many writers of books on how to improve your writing stress the importance of setting up a regular daily discipline of writing from 20 minutes to 2 hours. They will also stress the importance of doing so in the same place, even in the same chair, so that your writing practice becomes an automatic part of your brain's routine associated with that physical environment. If your brain doesn't kickstart into writing mode, you could start by writing anything. How you're feeling, what you're wearing, who you want to catch up with this weekend, your shopping list. That will get you into the groove of then writing in relation to your thesis. These writing sessions, though, are not for doing thesis admin, not for tidying up your references or endnotes or updating your bibliography or taking notes on a book or an article. They are purely for writing about your thesis and intended to increase your proficiency as a fluid writer of English. The more you do this, the more you will find that your thinking and your writing begin to sync. Your writing becomes your thinking at the same time as it helps you think more clearly and more fluidly. Next day, when you sit down to write again, reread and edit what you wrote the day before. This will help you develop precious self-editing practices. It may seem like practicing this daily discipline is taking precious time away from collecting your evidence or analysing your results or reading that next really important article. These are all important tasks, but both your thesis and your later writing as a scholar will benefit in a more lasting way from following this daily discipline of writing. One of the finest writers I know, Professor Tom Griffiths at the Australian National University, once told a group of PhD students that the best thing they could do each morning, that is before their brain gets tired, is to sit down and write. Even when you don't feel like it, even when you feel like you have nothing to say, just write something. He still does this for 20 minutes each morning, and it shows in his work. Writing as first, second, then third draft. Someone wisely said, you can't edit a blank page. You have to start somewhere, and often it's by writing rubbish. Words, maybe sentences, that will only make sense and be useful to you. This isn't wasted work. Remember that saying, how do I know what I think until I see what I write? It's the first stage of a long process of iterative writing and thinking, or drafting and redrafting. You may have a stereotype of an academic as someone who writes his or her thinking effortlessly. That's what makes them really smart, right? That's what makes them much smarter than I could ever be. This last thought is called the imposter syndrome. And research shows that 90% of researchers experience this across all cultures and nations. So it's comforting to know that you are not alone. You need to forget the self-judgment or the imagined judgment of others and expend that energy productively writing. What you're doing is hard, it's going to hurt your head, it's going to be confusing and sometimes painful. But if you persevere, it can also become one of the most rewarding professional activities you may ever do. Creating and crafting new knowledge in your own unique voice, from your own unique perspective, respectful of the scholarship on which it builds. In fact, you may even become an addict. For me, there is no more difficult or satisfying occupation than to wrestle with the development of a research project and then struggle with articulating my point of view in my own words. If you are a lifelong learner, these crafts are worth developing and continuously refining. Chances are, if you are doing a research thesis, then you are someone who is not going to be satisfied with the ordinary surface answers to your curiosities or your questions. So hone your craft, it's worth it. So just to repeat, your first task in academic writing is not to create great literature first off. That comes much later. Make the writing work for you to develop your thinking, and if useful, manage your anxieties. Do it for yourself. You will eventually have to present your ideas in language that is well considered and carefully created. But ideas first, elegant prose much later. Draft and draft again. The best writers will allow for 3 or 4 drafts. When you do get to the stage of writing your first draft, the focus will still be on structuring your argument. Your thesis will need to have a beginning, a middle and an end that present a coherent, sequential argument using persuasive evidence, grounded in a sound method and drawing on the relevant scholarship. Different disciplines and faculties will have different requirements for the presentation of your thesis, but all of them can be stated in simple language. What is your research question and why are you asking it? What have you read about this? What have you done to find out your answer? Where did you find it? And what do you reckon? What do you think is the answer to your research question in the end after doing all of this work? Thank you again for listening. I'll see you next time.